Hello, I'm Michael Garrigan. I am a commercial entrepreneur turned social entrepreneur. And as I've been talking to people from all walks of life, from low moderate income individuals to individuals in nonprofit organizations to educators to elected officials on both state and federal levels, I find more and more consensus that says that our traditional approaches to solving our social, economic, and environmental problems are simply not working, and we need to try something new, try something different, try something refreshing, since old solutions don't seem to be working. And that's what this video is all about. This video is about E2M. It is an innovative economic solution that we and many others feel can take us a long way towards solving some of the most difficult problems that we've been facing. And the basis of this solution is very simple. What we've found is that there is one root cause to many of the problems that we face socially, economically, and environmentally. One root cause. And the solution to fix this one root cause is easier to implement than it is to solve any one of the many thousands of problems it causes. So we'd like to take this time to talk with you about this root cause and show you how we can all together solve this with very simple actions on your part that don't ask you to spend time and don't ask you to spend money, but to simply do some of the things you do every day in a slightly different way. This doesn't involve the government. This doesn't involve special legislative action. This doesn't involve anything other than us as people and communities with a desire to do this. So please join us. Listen carefully to what we have to say. Evaluate it, and you too may decide, as have many others, that truly there is a very bright future available to us all. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Ed Bisson. I'm a member of the E2M Organizing Committee. I first became aware of E2M when my son returned from a seminar conference where he had heard Michael Garrigan make a presentation about the E2M concept. And my son gave me a copy of a manuscript to read, which I took a look at, and a number of things were of interest to me. First was I felt that it recognized the problem that there were inequities and difficulties in our current economic system that needed to be addressed. The other thing that was of particular interest to me was it addressed those problems without proposing that we throw everything out that we have, but that we use what we had to do things in a better way. Another thing that was very important to me was this was a voluntary thing. The businesses that would be involved could choose to be. The people who supported the concept could choose to do that. No one else was telling people or telling someone what they should do with their money or their business. This was something that could be done locally without any change in the existing structure. People could get together to start building a better economy and a better community, and this could be done on a small scale, but it had large-scale implications because if it could be done in one community or one region, it could be done in many communities and many regions and throughout the country. It also didn't require any involvement of government. No one had to approve or vote or pass or be convinced to do anything. This was something that could be done by the people themselves. Would be nice if politicians and governments helped, but it wasn't necessary. E2M is a compelling enough concept for me that I've been willing to spend at least one day or more a week for the last year and a half working on helping to get the system organized. I would say in the group I'm working with, I'd probably identify myself as a little more conservative than some of my peers. And one of the things about E2M, which I think is particularly should be compelling to people, is that I think it's something that conservative, moderates, and progressives could agree on because it works to solve the problem and really doesn't get bogged down in any particular ideology. E2M is an exciting concept, and I hope that you'll take the time to view this DVD and listen to the opinions of educators, historians, and elected officials, the young, the old, and everyone in between. And I hope that you'll think about how you might contribute in a large or small way to the further development of the E2M movement that I think can provide us with a bright and exciting future.
When I came to E2M, it was after recently graduating from college, where I'd been involved in a lot of social justice and environmental activities. It was at a point where I realized that what I needed to work on, where I needed to direct my energy, was on systemic change. That it's important to fight battles, but the battles aren't the war, and I feel like and felt like at that point we were losing the war. Well, when we talked, it was about the disconnect between the entire economic system that says you need more, that it pits us against each other, and basically the end result is that individuals are disenfranchised for the benefit of large corporations. So that's when we talked. It was, even though we came from different places and we just met, it was really like we were talking about the very same thing, even though the examples that we used were so different. And that's when I realized that E2M is something that, as a concept and as something that I feel is absolutely possible because it's so simple, E2M is this amazing system, this amazing way to connect people, communities, businesses, all these elements together so that we're all working for the same thing.
I think E2M is a gift to the young. That's how I see it. What would you say to the young?
There is the mentality, at least when I was on campus 3 years ago, 4 years ago, getting old is so easy.
Effortless.
I think it's a feeling that there's so much to be done. There's so much to be done. There's so many things that matter. And it's easier not to do than to do. It's just easier. You don't have to think about it. I stopped watching a lot of sort of progressive movies. I haven't been reading books because I feel like I'm inundated with negative messages about how wrong things are. And there's a sense, especially when you are 19, 20, 21, that you didn't make the mess, but you have to deal with it. And you don't know how to deal with it because you're not listened to and not taken seriously. And I guess my message to those in high school and in college and younger that you can change things. E2M doesn't just provide a list of what needs to change, it provides the blueprint for how you can get things done because it's a system. That's why this is important. That's what the gift is to the youth, is the method, the blueprint, the way to make change possible. So you're not fighting the system, you are the system.
Hello. It was at this desk on January 1st of 2000 when I first wrote the initial documents that would describe a new economic system that can take us to a very bright future. And in that document, I discussed a root cause to many of the problems that we face on a social, economic, and environmental level, and laid out a plan that showed that it was easier to eliminate the root cause than it was to fix any one of the problems that it caused. And that root cause was that the goal for investment in our free market economy is to produce maximum profits and maximum growth for investors. You cannot run a planet or a nation or a community very long in an economic system based on maximizing profits and growth for very few people. And in order to counterbalance that criteria, we need to create a new criteria of adequate profit, sustainable growth for the good of all. And in order to create that new criteria and have it be a counterbalancing force to the greed-based system under which we live and for which we labor, we need to have a very significant basis of investment. Now, there is an investor who will invest and accept that criteria for investment. And not only will this investor accept adequate profit and sustainable growth for the good of all, but it requires it because its survival depends on achieving adequate profits and sustainable growth for the good of all. And this investor doesn't have millions of dollars or billions of dollars. This investor has trillions of dollars. So who is that investor? Who is that investor that can come in with a new vision for investment and transform our economic system? That investor is the community itself. And this is what E2M does. E2M creates the economic infrastructure and network that allows the community itself to pick up the wealth concentrating tool of capitalism, the most wealth concentrating tool in the history of humanity, and use that tool to create enormous amounts of wealth for itself, just as individuals and investors and corporations have been doing for hundreds of years. And when the community picks up the tool of capitalism, it can become as economically powerful and wealthy as large corporations. And with an economically powerful and wealthy community, you can begin to address social, economic, and environmental issues with a new vision, not attainable through the system we currently live in and work for. And the way that the community uses this tool of capitalism to create wealth for itself is it forms collaborations with entrepreneurs, both young and old, starting new businesses or who currently own businesses, And in these collaborations, these corporations and small businesses commit 5 to 20% of their income and equity to the community to be spent on community purposes through the Regional Economic Council, a new organization that we've already established here in Western Massachusetts. And the community in turn, you and I, use our purchasing power, which equals $7.4 trillion per year throughout the nation. Enough money to support 7.4 million companies doing $1 million a year in business each. The community uses that tremendous purchasing power to buy its goods and purchases from the companies in the E2M economic system. And as communities spend more money with these companies, the companies become more successful, their entrepreneurs become more successful, their investors become more successful, and the community itself creates tremendous amounts of wealth for itself. And that's the basic purpose of the economic model. So we invite you to watch further. Listen to historians. Listen to a lecture at the Boston Social Forum discussing how our economic system is not sustainable and is currently unraveling, and how we might use this model to create a new vision for ourselves as a society and to create the tremendous amounts of economic power and wealth that we need to steer ourselves on a new course for a bright and successful future with opportunities for all of us. So after you've listened to this presentation, if you'd like to help, simply log on to our website. That's www.e2m.org. At that site, you can simply take a pledge of support that indicates your interest in buying E2M branded products or buying from E2M companies. And that'll help us create more products and more companies that will allow you to begin to use your purchasing power to create the economic power for your community, to begin to address the issues that are most important to all of us, to ensure a bright, stable, sustainable future. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Hi, my name is David Bisson. I'm a member of the E2M Organizing Committee, and I also sit on the Board of Directors for E2M Org. I'm just going to give a brief overview of how the E2M economic community works. There's three main components of an E2M economic community. One is the community itself, or the general public. Another is the Regional Economic Council, which is a board of people that represents the regional community. And the other is E2M certified businesses. The purpose of the E2M economic community is to provide the community itself, or the general public, with the means to access the financial resources it needs to solve the economic, social, and environmental problems that are prevalent in many of our communities today. The E2M economic community does this by establishing an infrastructure that allows the community to create wealth for itself within our current free market economic system, just as corporations and individuals have been doing for the last 250 years. With the ability to earn a predictable and reliable income, a community has unprecedented opportunities to implement effective, long-term solutions to persistent community problems. The Regional Economic Council is a group of 24 community members whose purpose is to distribute community income in a way that serves the best interests of the entire community. The community nominates members to serve on the Regional Economic Council and has the right to recall members of the council. In addition, community members attend council meetings, serve on council subcommittees, and provide input on community needs. An E2M certified business is a business that contributes 5 to 20% of its profits or equity to the community through the Regional Economic Council and makes an additional 5 to 20% available to its employees through profit sharing or stock purchase plans. The community earns its income through its equity ownership and profit sharing in E2M certified businesses. Community members can ensure that the community's income is predictable and reliable by simply purchasing their goods and services from E2M certified businesses. E2M certified businesses will enjoy long-term success and stability because of purchases by community members who understand that the success of E2M businesses contributes to the success of the community. In addition to the support they receive from community members, E2M companies receive support from the Regional Economic Council in the form of very low-interest loans and friendly equity investments. By providing low-interest loans and equity investments in existing E2M companies, and by creating even more E2M companies through venture capital investments, the Regional Economic Council ensures the continual reliability and growth of community income. As investments in E2M companies produce increasing levels of community income, the Regional Economic Council funds programs related to children and youth, affordable housing, low-interest mortgages and loans to community members, healthcare, education, and other community-enhancing initiatives. Of the funds the Regional Economic Council distributes, 75% are spent in the local region, 20% are spent nationally to help other regions establish E2M economic communities, and 5% are spent internationally to develop a global E2M network. E2M creates an innovative infrastructure that allows communities to achieve unprecedented economic self-determination and self-sufficiency. We sincerely believe that with your help, E2M can open a new era of economic prosperity and opportunity for all people on a regional, national, and quite possibly global level.
Basically, what E2M is all about is an alternative economic model, and what we are interested in doing here is developing the model that will allow us to transfer capital into the hands of the community, and of course, along with capital is economic power. Let me just briefly talk to you about my history so that we have some basis for credibility and understanding. I am a commercial entrepreneur turned social entrepreneur. In my commercial years, I was involved in manufacturing, developed inventions, and most recently, my company, Neon Technology, produced a light source that we use in the neon sign industry. So this is what neon signs looked like before my company was developed, and this is what neon signs looked like after I developed the technology. And essentially what we did is we replaced the tubes of light with engraved plates that contained the image, which was then filled with neon gas. And these are some of the customers that we worked with in our manufacturing. I have, during the course of this time, employed 450 people in plants here and in Australia, and did a joint venture with E2M, which was the largest company in the world in 1992. So I've got a pretty good history in commercial entrepreneurship and understand that roller coaster. This is a picture that was in a local newspaper and a story they did about the company, but I've got it on the screen because this is the end of our production line from our manufacturing process, and we're going to talk about that. And I then went on to become the Director of Small Business Development for the Valley CDC, which was the beginning of my social entrepreneurship career. My job there was to help low, moderate income individuals start businesses. And during my period of time there, since November of '99, I've helped people start 60 businesses, have distributed $450,000 worth of loans to these folks, and these are some of the newspaper articles about my clients. And these are some of the pictures of the businesses that we started with them. In this article that was in a major business journal about the remaking of the city of East Hampton, my office was credited as third on a list of the most significant catalysts for the revitalization of that entire city. I began my social entrepreneur career in addition working with the anti-displacement project. Many of you were at Julie's presentation last night. She talked about that. This is a group of 1,450 families who own their own apartment complexes in 4 apartment complexes throughout western Massachusetts. And my consulting work with them involves helping them understand how to use their $40 million of assets and cash flow to create economic power. And that's having some real interesting results. This is a group of some of the folks. We're headed up to John Kerry's office. This is the elevator in the Senate office building. And we went up to see Mr. Kerry's folks and Mr. Kennedy's folks and had a very nice meeting with them that day. Once I got out of the factory environment, I had a chance to really begin to think about what was going on in the world. And prior to that, it was really a series of payables, receivables, manufacturing, and I never really had a chance to think about it. And as Bertrand Russell says, it's a healthy thing now and then to hang a question mark on the things you have long taken for granted. And I began to have some ideas on how we might create some solutions to some of our most pressing problems. And so on January 1st of 2000, I wrote the first page of what became my personal manifesto to actually try to do something about this situation. You know, there's enough books written on this subject to fill libraries. And the talking must stop and the action must begin. And I began to go out and talk to people about my ideas of restructuring our economy. And I thought, well, the first place I should go to should be maybe the people that want to see this happen least, which is the government. So I began going out and talking to my political associates. And my friend Steve Rogers was the first one to come onto our board. But when I talked to Stanley Rosenberg's chief of staff, Mary Jane, she immediately came on the board. And Benjamin Swan is an historical and legendary figure in the civil rights movement. He's a representative. John Oliver, my congressman, within 10 minutes of my conversation said, would you please put my chief of staff on your board? Then Julie came on, Debbie Eaton just came on the board, and we have 2 directors emeritus, Courtney Rafe, who helped write some of the nonprofit literature, and Tim Eddy. Tim was the CFO and a friend of mine of an $800 million company, Stanhome Products. And we're going to talk about Stanhome at some point in time. So what is E2M? E2M is an innovative economic solution to the social, economic, and environment problems we face as communities and individuals. It is only about economics. We are not talking about ecological issues. We're not talking about social issues directly. We're not talking about many of the problems which face us, because we understand they're there. And there's a lot of people talking about those problems. And there are many of those who are much more capable than we would be at solving those problems. And we're not interested in duplicating bureaucracies or duplicating efforts. The reason for being of E2M is to create funds to become the implementing component of those agendas. We have many beautiful people and many beautiful entrepreneurs and nonprofits who are seeds to change, but they are planted in infertile soil. The soil, which is our economic system, is not soil that is helping these organizations to grow. It does not nurture these organizations. It, in fact, impedes these organizations. And E2M moves to the very lowest levels to the economic foundation of our system to create fertile soil where these organizations can flourish. And so that is why we stay away from specific agendas, because we are focused strictly on the economic issues. When I began thinking about the economic issues, something became very obvious to me. And it was obvious to me that many of our most pressing problems are caused by a single root cause, which then creates other problems. And I found that it was easier to eliminate the root cause than it is to solve any one of the many thousand problems that it caused. So we began to focus on the root cause. And the root cause is that the criteria for investment in our system is maximum profits and maximum growth for relatively few stockholders. This is also the legal requirement and the purpose of the corporation. So let's look at that. Maximum profits and growth for a few stockholders. Why is that not good? Well, one reason it's not good is because it encourages wealth acquisition strategies based on getting as much as you can, as quickly as you can, while you can. It is a greed-based model. It calls for corporate missions that place profits before people. It creates a culture of self-interest that pollutes the corporate, social, economic, and environmental agendas. Then the insatiable appetites for profits are never-ending. It's an unsustainable type of a situation, and it results in an inequitable concentration of wealth. So let's talk about that inequitable concentration of wealth for a moment. 40% of all of the private wealth in America is owned by 1% of the population. 92% of all private wealth are owned by only 7% of the population. 1% of the population owns 50% of all of the investable monies in America. So what's the problem with that? It places economic power in the hands of the few. When you do that, you create some serious political, democratic issues. Also, money attracts opportunities, so there becomes a concentration of opportunities. This also transforms ownership into debtorship. Let's ask why. If 92% of all private wealth are owned by only 7% of the population, they don't have all of that stuff packed in their attics. So these assets are still spread out throughout the society. Basically, if all of these assets are distributed throughout, then because they're owned by few people, but they're in the possession of many, those people that possess them actually own them through debt. So basically, as you concentrate wealth into the hands of very few people, you increase debt throughout society. And so that's how you transform ownership into debtorship. And that is not the American way of doing things. And it also subjugates the poor and middle class who labor under poverty, excessive debt, and of course democracy suffers. And as Judge Louis Brandeis said, we can have a democratic society or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of the few. We cannot have both. We are at that point in time where many of us are beginning to realize that our democracy and our system is eroding. And as Gar mentioned and said, it is the task of our generation to now develop the economic model that can reverse what's happening. I want to talk about the economic model for a moment. And you remember that production line, the picture at the end of my production line? Well, my manufacturing manager, Ed Cushing, came into my office one evening and he said, "Michael, if that production line stops for 1 minute, I will have failed you as a production manager." And I asked why. He said, "Because it costs you $600 an hour from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. to run that production line. If you have to stop for 15 minutes to buy a box of screws, that $2 box of screws just cost you $152. So you have to keep this production line moving." Now that also means you need to bring in resources. Because if you don't have your resources, your screws, your glass, your other types of material, the production line will stop. You have to have the process. You have to have employees. You need your factory building. And you now have an output as well. And you can do two things with the output. You can put them into inventory, which means you store them in a warehouse. That costs you money. You have only so much money you can spend on inventory before you run out of money and you shut down your manufacturing line. Or you can sell it and produce profits, which then you can use to buy new resources to continue to build more goods. So you have to sell. And Basically, that is what our economic system is. It is no different than my manufacturing production line, because the economic system itself demands profits. Why does it demand profits? Because the investors demand profits. And not only do the investors demand profits, they demand growth. Profits alone won't do it. They want growth. The worker suffers as a result of this because corporations are forced to produce maximum products. And as far as output goes, how do you get more stuff out the door? You create a society of consumerization where you are putting children in front of televisions starting at the age of 2, telling them to buy, because if the buying stops, the system collapses. The way in this country we measure the health of this system is through the GDP. That is the total amount of goods and services produced in the United States in a year. And the GDP, if it's growing, we have a healthy economy. From 1985 to 2001, the GDP grew and the economy grew more than in any other time in history. Now, 74% of the GDP is determined by individuals' purchases of goods and services. That means that if the economy is growing, most of that product is being bought by individuals. But we already understand that they're under debt. They used to buy this stuff with cash. But when the cash ran out, we said, well, we can't stop selling to them. What are we going to do? Let's get them to mortgage their future. Let's put credit cards out there. And then when the credit cards were full, corporations said, well, we'll do credit cards too. And when those got done, they said, well, how about home equity loans? Let's put some home equity loans out there. Let's toss some more money in the system through debt. And well, let's toss out a tax return. Put a check for $300 or $600 in their hands. Why? In order to keep the machine running, to keep the GDP growing. So as you look between 1985 and 2001, is that economic expansion? No, folks. That is not a chart of economic expansion. That is a chart of total U.S. household debt in trillions of dollars. Between 1985 and 2002, household debt went from $2 trillion to $7.3 trillion. And we live in a system that, in order to be healthy, indebts its population. Because if it stops, the system fails. Now, is that a sustainable system? Does anybody believe that's sustainable? And if it's not a sustainable system, we need to be asking, what is the mode of the end of it? If it's not sustainable, that means it's going to stop. How does it stop? I asked a number of people, how do you think this stops? Some people said, I don't know. Some people said, I don't care, I'll be dead by then. Others said, economic collapse. Another one said, social revolution. Another one said, world war. Here's one fellow that says, more than any time in history, mankind faces a crossroads. One path leads to despair and utter hopelessness. The other to total extinction.
Which one do you want?
Let us pray we have to choose correctly. That's our friend Woody Allen. So the issue here is, for those of us who are older, we understand that they're turning up the treadmill. America is the most productive country in the world. This was one thing that was in the news. American workers are the most productive people in the world. Why the hell do you think they're the most productive people in the world? Because you laid half of them off when you told the other half, if you don't produce twice as much, we're going to toss you out. And they're working 45 hours a week. And that's why the kids don't have mom and or dad at home. We are working people to death. And as Mohandas K. Gandhi said, there is more to life than increasing its speed. So what's the solution? We know it's unsustainable, and we can sit here and talk about it all day long, but as Gar and Julie said, Talking is over. There is no more time to talk about this stuff. You must actually do something about this, because from my personal point of view, we have 25 years starting from 1995 to determine who controls our planet. Corporations that give you what we've just been talking about because they are at the mercy of this standard. Because, you know, corporations are just people. They hug their wives and children or husbands and go to work, and they do things there that they hate to do. I'll erase these names. There goes 5 jobs, or there goes 5,000. Do you think people want to be doing that to each other? Do you think that people in these corporations are inherently evil? No, they are not. They are victims of this standard because their boss is saying to you, lay those 50 people off or you're out on the street too. Or if you don't hit your numbers this quarter to keep our investors happy, you're out. And I don't care whether your wife and kids are all terminally ill. Either produce or get out of here. So what's the solution? Do we dismantle the system? Do we dismantle capitalism? Let me tell you, that's not too likely. Washington Post, Sunday, May 2nd, 1971. A bunch of beautiful young people came down to Washington to say, you know, enough is enough. This says, encamped protesters with an upside-down American flag in the foreground and the setting sun in the background listen to a rock concert. Here's the response. This says, troops make a helicopter landing on the Washington Monument grounds. In all, 180 soldiers were landed there. Few demonstrators were in the vicinity of the monument at the time, and no confrontation took place. I was one of the few that was there. I was at the corner of 18th and Ohio when this Huey helicopter, the same ones used in Vietnam, deployed these Marines with rifles and fixed bayonets in an environment of tear gas, sirens, chaos, and I'll tell you, you know, there's nothing that'll wake you up in the morning like a whiff of tear gas, but it's not the way to go. Dismantling the system is not the way to go. In fact, we need to embrace the system. What? Do we change laws? That takes too long. There is no legislative agenda that we can impact quickly enough. So what do? We address the root problem. The root problem is that the criteria for investment in this free market economy is maximum profit, maximum growth for a few. And corporations must move to that demand. So what's the solution? The solution is to change the investor. Change the stockholder. What we need to do is find a stockholder who will accept a new standard and criteria for investment of adequate profits and sustainable growth for the good of all. Now, if you can establish that as a criteria for investment, it is a new option that you can provide to add the counterbalancing force to the greed which drives this country. Now, who is such an investor that would take adequate profits and sustainable growth for the good of all? Because adequate profits could be 1% a year. Sustainable growth could be 1% a year. For the good of all, oh my God, that's the worst part of it. So who will accept that as an adequate, as an investment criteria? Understanding that we need billions of dollars invested under this criteria. Who's out there? Philanthropists, some, but not enough. Socially responsible investors, not enough. Because this standard needs to be ingrained within our system. And it needs to be ingrained in a way that it can never pull back again. But there is one investor who will accept adequate profit, sustainable growth for the good of all. In fact, in its most selfish moment, this investor demands adequate profits and sustainable growth for the good of all. Because if this investor does not achieve adequate profits and sustainable growth for the good of all, it will die. Its survival depends on the establishment of this standard. And it doesn't have millions of dollars. It doesn't have hundreds of millions of dollars. The good news is that this investor has trillions of dollars. Does anybody know who that investor is? That investor is the community itself. It is the community itself. And that is what E2M does. E2M creates the infrastructure that allows the community itself as an entity to pick up this tool of capitalism, the most powerful tool ever created in the history of humanity for concentrating wealth. It allows the community itself to pick up that tool and to create wealth for itself. The missing link to capitalism has been that there has been no way for the community itself to pick up this tool. And when Guy Alport said last night, we need to figure out a way where you can create a decentralized economy, where communities control capital, then we will have done something. And that's what E2M does. In the economic system where money is flowing, it is the corporations which are the concentrators of wealth. So the community needs to create collaborations with existing corporations, and it also needs to start its own corporations and businesses. The E2M certified business. How does a business become E2M certified? It's very simple. The business only needs to agree, the entrepreneurs, whether it's a young entrepreneur who is tired of what the future looks like, or they're older entrepreneurs like myself who've been on the roller coaster and say, this isn't working, I need something different. We are asking those entrepreneurs to donate 5 to 20% of their equity to the community. We're also asking them to make available to their employees 5 to 20% of their equity or wealth through purchase options. The dark and light blue columns represent the amount of equity held by the community or set aside for employees. It's not a lot of money to be putting out there, and not a lot of equity to be putting into the hands of the community. Here's how that money is distributed. The employees of the corporation themselves decide where half of that money goes by vote of the employees. The president is an employee, and someone on the line is an employee. One person, one vote. What are we going to do with the 50% of the money? So if they decide they want to donate that money to this young girl who's dying of cancer to try to help her with medical treatments that she can't get, if they want to decide that that's their project, when they go into work, people don't work just for the paycheck. They want to believe that their work is for something that really has meaning. And that is why we have the employees vote. We want them to feel that they are part of something really wonderful and really unique, and give them a sense that their work is really meaningful. And when you do that, you empower employees in a way that you can't achieve anywhere else. And Tim Eddy, who is one of my board members, will tell you that Stanhome Products, he was the CFO for 35 years, from when they were a smaller company to when they were $800 million. And Tim, when he was a young man, walked into that company, and the employees, as they saw the suit and tie, Tim was a little reluctant, said, come on, let's show you what we're doing. We want to show you what's happening. The average term of service in that company was 22 years. Fathers and mothers passed jobs down to children. The company had a 7,000 person waiting list to work there. That's what happens when you empower employees. We look at communities regionally because in this economic model, it must be highly decentralized into regions because essentially what we are doing is we are talking about attracting and collecting and aggregating trillions of dollars of wealth. But basically you don't put all that money in one location. So what we are doing is we're going to create regions all over the United States. There could be 500 of them. And we're going national and international with this. And so that they are able to defend themselves, so that the system, once it is ingrained, is not subject to attack from within or without. Now, each one of these regions is an independent entity. However, they can also act collectively through the internet to produce agendas or initiatives that require massive amounts of capital on national or international levels. So they're independent. They're independent from E2M org financially. They are separate entities. So the Regional Economic Council, it's a board of 24 people, each serving 30-month rotating terms, nominated by the community, elected by the board, and that can be removed individually by a form of democratic process that the boards themselves will need to decide. Now, it's representative of local demographics. E2M org is the chartering organization which chooses the first 12 of the members of the REC in each region, so that we don't have the local criminal organization starting one of these models. So we're looking for pastors, educators, bankers, investors, youth, workers, entrepreneurs, and others who can be readily identified as a core group of 12 people. From then on, you add 4 people every 5 months until you get to 24. And then you add 4 every 5 months and you remove the oldest 4. And from that point on, you have rotating terms to prevent the concentration of power within these regional economic councils. So this is how you eliminate individual breed-based thinking, by having the REC represent collective thinking that is willing to give out the money that it's going to receive from its businesses and from other sources. Of the money that goes to the regional council, 75% stays local, voted by the regional council, 20% is spent nationally to help seed other E2M regions around the country, and 5% is spent internationally. And that 5%, a $50 check to Afghanistan, is not going to make a huge difference, but the purpose for that is to establish even the most tenuous lines of communication around our planet upon which this model will grow.
When I was a child was when the United Farm Workers had their boycott grapes thing.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
And I remember my mom really being tortured because she loves grapes. But basically, you know, I grew up in a union household, and that was a legitimate grievance, and we could recognize it. But it's really interesting that I think in a lot of circles, consumer politics is all about giving something up in order to be a just and moral person. It's something else entirely to actually use your everyday purchasing habits in order to build a completely different world. And I think that E2M as a model kind of builds on that idea, in that it tries to tie your everyday purchasing habits to companies that are committed to the community and the region and to improving well-being. So it's a pretty simple concept, but in a way, it doesn't put my mom in that dilemma of like, I like grapes, but I feel like I can't buy them. another dimension of the E2M idea is that, you know, you can look for the certification and say, all right, this company has a commitment to its workers and to its immediate community, and by purchasing goods there, like I said, everything from coffee to biodiesel, you're in a position to know that you're helping your immediate local community. So rather than being kind of asking you to give up consumption in order to have political convictions, you can actually engage in your everyday buying habits. Do, as Michael says all the time, the sort of the minimum amount possible in order to achieve maximum results. So instead of a boycott, we have a pro-cot.
E2M, as you know, is a regional effort, but you link the regions to create a national effort, but we're interested in creating an international effort as well.
Right.
So what's the viability of E2M moving globally? Is there fertile soil out there in which to plant E2M seeds, would you say, in many of these countries that you've studied?
Yes, I would say unequivocally yes. And one of the reasons for that is if you look at this idea that basically trade is all about dismantling barriers and sort of making communities more vulnerable to the capriciousness of capital. I think the stalemate of this current round of trade talks is an indication to me that, you know, basically a lot of developing countries are saying, you know, basta, enough. But that doesn't, you know, it's not just enough to kind of be against globalization as we've known it. We should also try and figure out, well, you know, it is a good thing that we can engage in trade and economic development. Maybe there's another way of doing it. And something, a mechanism that links the process of participating in the market with improving community well-being, improving environmental well-being. People are absolutely hungry for that. You know, so Mexico, these communities in Mexico, these regional communities are one instance where I think E2M could take off right away. Likewise with Argentina, which was a victim of incredible capital flight and unemployment on a massive scale. People have started taking over the factories that they used to work in that were abandoned by their former owners. And again, they're doing it in a way where they're participating in the market economy, but they're also using the factory space in order to run schools, free care clinics, theaters, social gatherings. So in a way, it just to me, or sort of organically reflects the same sort of imperative that's at work in E2M also. Let me see. Where else could it go? China. Why not?
Now, this model, where does it take us? In summary, financially, it creates a whole new paradigm shift in our society. It adds the counterbalancing force of love and sharing and compassion and nurturing in the business environment, which normally rejects those as valid concepts. Ecologically, it begins to throttle back that economic machine which demands to consume as many resources as it possibly can to produce as much product, So our ecological problems begin to settle back and we relax, and maybe we get to a 24-hour work week. We begin to reduce the throughput in our manufacturing systems, because as you put a new balancing, relaxing force in, you begin to release corporations from this merciless standard. You begin to let them run and operate with the hearts and souls of the people that work there, as opposed to the demands of invisible investors, who, by the way, are victims themselves. The rich are victims. They have the most to lose. We need to help them too. And we're going to help them help us. And they're going to say, thank God someone figured out a way. There aren't a lot of bad people out there. It's a system that is just focused on the worst of us. And we're humans, and, we'll get through the difficult part, but we need to create systems where we can really nurture. And that's the spiritual component of E2M. Because it's based on love, and it will be love and compassion that will solve the problem, not struggle and resistance and anger. And finally, the market we're talking about here is the United States. It's the most difficult market in the world to sell this concept to. There are emerging communist countries and third world countries whose leaders that don't yet know about E2M will, when they find out, say, that's what we want. We want a free market system that won't result in 1% of the population owning 40% of the assets. So maybe Mr. Putin will decide that the employee component is 35 or 40%. And that these regional economic councils can in fact be wonderful partners to government. Because many of our government and politicians go into office hoping for the best with a mission to save the world. But when they find the reality of it, it's discouraging. And they would rather have their most powerful financial partner be an entity, a community, with the same motives that they had, rather than some damn shark who's looking up through razor-sharp teeth saying, do this so I can get as much for myself as possible. Politicians want this to happen. That's why John Oliver asked the Ford Foundation to give us some money so that we could hopefully self-replicate this model throughout the nation. So we're going to bring the globe into it. So it is not local only. We act locally. We create a vision. We create conversation. We create an example that will shine a light nationally and internationally. And I'll close by saying, as Victor Hugo did, there is one thing stronger than all the armies in the world, and that is an idea whose time has come.